You has to be you. Me has to be me. And we have to infuse and incorporate almost like a shared bank account into this third entity. We cannot become the third entity. When we do, our personal development is stifled.
How does somebody really start to navigate going down that like personal development path, but also still incorporating their partner into it?
The shortcut to purpose is think about what really pisses you off.
Yes. If you find yourself getting upset about something, that is a dead giveaway to pause and look a little bit deeper. Jade, I'm so excited to have you back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And we get to do this in person this time.
I know, it's super fun. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. Well, the last time that you were here on The Wellness Revolution, we were talking all things hormones. We were talking to, just women over 40 and really helping them to navigate kind of that time in their life. And, we are here today to kind of talk about kind of switching things around.
It's a whole other direction.
But I love this because it's really funny because it really is almost a mirror to my own pivot that I've done. And this isn't really a pivot for you, though. You've really always been very, heavily invested in personal development and sharing that with your audience. And so you have a book. You Grow Me, and actually the cover of it, you complete me with complete scratched out. You Grow Me, which is the next level human philosophy of love, sex, and romantic connection. I would love for you just to start off first and foremost, like sharing with the listeners, what led you to writing this book?
Well, two reasons. Okay. So number one, I know people don't always think these two things are related. I know that a lot of people know my work as metabolism work, and they don't always realize that we really, as humans, have our psychological states determine an awful lot about our metabolic states. If you think about it, right, like our psychology is tied to our stress responses, the way we see the world, how safe we feel in the world, our safety and security. Well, that has to do with certain things. Finances can determine that, our stories about finances, our health and fitness, obviously, but personal relationships. And the most consequential personal relationship is our romantic relationships. And so if we don't feel safe and secure in these places, this oftentimes does dramatically impact the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenals, the thyroid, the whole hormonal system. So that's the first reason, is that one of the reasons was I was seeing people doing all the things with diet and exercise and not being able to get results and control eating and all those things. And I started to realize this has to do with childhood development. This has to do with adolescent development. This has to do with betrayal in the romantic realm. This has to do with a psychological orientation towards striving and threat mode because of the way that we were treated in our personal relationships, and the romantic relationship being the most consequential. So that was the first recognition and interest in this work. The next recognition and the next reason is I think we do romance all wrong. And we have a cultural story about romance that causes it to be a dysfunctional relationship for most people. So from my perspective, the way that you approach your romantic relationships determines the success of those romantic relationships. For example, if you go into every romantic relationship with this idea of you're supposed to find the one and they're supposed to complete you, then you are not actually doing what is required for your own growth and development. So my orientation is that a romantic relationship should grow you, not complete you. And just so people know the name, because they get a little confused about this, there was Jerry Maguire was a classic movie back in the 90s for those of you who don't know this movie. And it had Tom Cruise in it and Renee Zellweger. And at the end of the movie, as you know, they're basically on the verge of splitting up, this new husband and wife, he says to her, "You complete me." And of course she goes, shut up, you had me at hello. And there's this iconic Hollywood thing. And then of course they hug and they kiss and they're supposed to live happily ever after at that point, right? And my thought was, I'm like, I cannot stand the way Hollywood does this because, from my perspective, anyone who's been in any consequential long-term relationship knows that that's the moment when the real relationship starts and shit starts to actually get hard. And we never talk about that. Our whole culture is built around this first meeting and falling in love and the lust and the rainbows and the orgasms and all this stuff. And we don't even deal with the real consequences of a long-term meaningful relationship. What happens and what is a partner supposed to do? So I feel like they are supposed to help you grow past these dysfunctional stories that we have tied in our unconscious that influence everything about the way we relate to finance, everything about the way we relate to health and fitness, everything about the way we relate to our purpose. And so for me, I think this is the most consequential book to write for health and fitness. I think it is directly tied, and I don't think people always understand that.
No, I mean, and I love that you bring that up. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the way we do one thing is the way we do everything, right? So it's like the way that we approach our habits, the way that we approach just our lifestyle, our nutrition, it really is, I think, tied to some of these limiting beliefs that we have. I mean, this is something I would always talk about when I was coaching women with nutrition. It was like, a lot of times why high achieving women struggle with their nutrition is because they are, to eat healthy is because they have this all or nothing mindset. Right. And so you're right. I mean, that's such a great point, is that, yes, it does kind of show up in all different areas of your life. Well, I'm curious for you because in this book, I mean, and I think I told you this, that I listened to this whole book on audio.
Way too much
I mean,
time
I was like, you've been in my ear for.
Yeah, and honestly, in this book, I really do. It's like it's hard to like me in this book because I go through all my dysfunctions too.
Actually, I think quite the opposite. I think what's so refreshing is really reading a book through a male's perspective. And what's so beautiful about this, we can't forget to mention Emily, because explain, actually, before we go into this, explain the kind of the way that this book is written.
Right. Well, so I think they all know, right? Like, so you're very close with my ex, you guys work together very closely, my ex-wife, Jill, and Jill and I wanted to write this book together. So we had always had a plan that we were eventually going to write this book together. And Jill is just super busy, and we are different in our work orientations. I'm a big project kind of guy. I can visualize it, do it, and get it done. Jill's sort of like a grind type of person, right? So it's hard for her to find, sort of a place in her schedule to get this done. So she said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do it. And one of my best girl buddies is Emily Goff. And she had been through the other side of infidelity. So, I was the liar and the cheater in my relationship. And Emily was the one who got lied and cheated on for 9 years in a relationship. And we developed a bond over this. And I went to her and I said, what do you think about writing this book? Jill's not going to do it with me. I really feel like it needs the female perspective and the other side of the story. And it turned out to be really beautiful. We wrote this I write my books really fast. She came here to my home in Asheville, North Carolina, hang out. We wrote it in 9 days, the first draft.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's a back and forth, really, just so you guys can know. Your question was, it's a back and forth between her writing and me writing from these different perspectives.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say, is I think for me, like, reading this book through your lens, through a male perspective, but a male who has actually done personal development work. I'm like, this is a foreign concept to me. I'm like, what do you mean? There's men out there that exist that actually understand their mother patterns? What are you like? What? I'm like, what?
Yeah. I know all my guy buds, my guy friends make fun of me. They're just like, who are you, dude? Like, what are you?
I mean, listen, it's refreshing and I like it, but I'm curious though, actually, speaking about like mother patterns, you talk a little bit about this in your book. And I do think that, whether or not you are, again, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, whether or not you're, tying this into how you show up in your romantic relationship or not, I think our mother patterns affect all aspects of the way that we do everything in our life and the way that we show up. So what did that look like for you, and kind of like, understanding that for you? Because it was pretty profound. When I read that, I was like, how you were able to tie back some of these dynamics with your mother. I'll never forget you talk in the book about when you guys were in the basement, I think with the laundry,
Yeah.
and it was that moment. And I can, as a mom, and you can, I would love for you to paint the picture
Yeah.
for the audience, but
Yeah.
as a mom, I can be like, oh my God, I know exactly what she
that
was
feels like.
feeling.
Yeah.
But then as the child, to see that through your lens of like what you must have been feeling, it was just really interesting.
Yeah,
So
and you want to know it's interesting. Forgive me because I may tear up on this because it's a deep-seated psychological, sort of place in your heart.
yeah.
Like we are those psychic. My psychic child lives, and so the emotions are real. But I'll paint it for people like this. The first thing I'll say, just as a reminder, I think most people know this: our childhood development, our adolescent development, and our young adult development. These are times where we don't have the maturity, the know-how, the tools, the wisdom to understand, to make sense of events. And
Yeah.
these don't have to be traumatic events like capital T traumas. It doesn't have to be physical abuse, sexual abuse. It can be just difficulties and um, uh, you know times where we are being hurt in some way or emotionally charged events. So this was an event. My mom was a very young mom. She had four of us by the time she was 27 or 28, so four little kids. She had mother traumas herself. And so I'll paint the picture to all of you listeners. She was a amazingly loving mother, but volatile, emotionally volatile, meaning that one minute she'd be happy, next minute she'd be sad. I'd find her crying in her room, sobbing. She would be, one minute I'd be running through the house with, mud, creek water coming down my legs, and she'd be like laughing at my antics. And another day I'd leave my socks on the floor and she'd freak out. So this is one moment when I'm a kid where we're downstairs in our basement all folding laundry, and we were just doing kid things, messing around, maybe not listening to her. And of course, like anyone who's a mother, like I don't know what this is like, but I can only imagine, just overwhelmed, never any rest, never, dealing with her own traumatic childhood,
Yeah.
feeling like she's got no help, and all the things. And she just loses it. And there's a moment where she collapsed on the steps down there and is sobbing and talking to herself. And she's essentially saying, I don't want to be here. I can't do this anymore. And as a child, and I could feel this in my emotional body right now, I knew what she meant. Like what she was saying is she wanted to kill herself. And it scared me to my core, right? And I had already was struggling with a lot of her emotional stuff.
Yeah.
But what this did to me is it caused a reaction in me to, I think that's where the people pleasing aspect of me came out. I just wanted to be a good boy. I wanted to protect my mother. I took that pain on. It really, really scared me. Now, fast forward to me in my romantic life, right? Where I am a people pleaser. I'm always taking care of my girls. I have a savior complex with women, but never asking anything for myself, putting my needs aside all the time. And so I was a liar and a cheater, I say, right? And I was an asshole and a manipulator at that time, not because I was a dick, not because I was a mean person, but because I was a people pleaser. And so I would lie and I would say what I thought you wanted to say, and I wouldn't actually ask anything for myself. And of course, what happens, and everyone
Right.
knows what happens when you do that to yourself emotionally. You start you distrust women, right? So I distrusted female emotions because what I learned from my mom is you can't trust female emotions. That's the first thing I learned. Don't trust a woman. Don't trust their emotions. And if they get emotional, definitely don't trust them. Right. So, like that's the first part. And then don't ask anything for yourself. Make sure you do take care of their needs, all of their needs, all the time. And this was the pattern that I developed around my mother. And then, of course, what a lot of people don't know, and I know it's a weird thing, but psychology is very clear on this, especially for heterosexual men and women. We tend to orient towards our opposite sex parent in some way because they're our first opportunity to, understand the opposite gender.
Right.
So if you have a good relationship with your parent, you're likely going to, in your first romantic partnership, you're going to be looking towards that. And if you don't, you might be looking for the opposite. But it's very clear, and I know it's an icky sort of thing to think about at first, but it's very clear that your romantic partners act as your parent. They act as your best friend. They act as your lover. They act as, your mentor. They act as your comic relief. And so you can see what happened. All my romantic partnerships were set up in a way with this pattern where I did not trust them. I would always be pleasing, but I had this other thing where, of course, the little boy in me wanted my mom's attention. So what was the third thing I was doing? Looking for constant female attention. And it was easy for me with new women because I didn't have to get emotionally attached to them.
Right.
I wasn't emotionally attached to them at all. I could keep it light. I didn't have to get into the dynamic with them. So this was my pattern. Ironically, I never cheated on anyone other than my wife, but I cheated emotionally a lot. Like I would, but I never physically. And of course, when you have this pattern, it's funny, Jill and I talk about this a lot, but I fell in love, or thought that I fell in love with the woman that I cheated with, because that's the only way for someone like me who was looking for this mommy figure kind of thing could do it. It would have to be a depth type of relationship. So all of that to essentially just illustrate that these childhood development things, I call them misguided unconscious decisions, by the way, MUD. Misguided because we don't have the wisdom, the intelligence, the know-how, the tools to make sense of these events. Unconscious because they're following us around and we don't realize it. But they actually are decisions. We do make a choice about how to be with women. What do I trust them or not? Are they trustworthy or not? We make a decision about, will I be people pleasing or not, and all of these things. And so that gives you an idea. And I know it's complicated, but I unwrap it in this book of how we do this kind of stuff without even knowing. And what's interesting, Amber, what I found is a lot of women who've read this book and who have been cheated on, they DM me, they send me, and they just go, I can see that my husband or they were dealing with a similar thing. Now, this isn't the case for all men who cheat, but it was for me.
Yeah. It's really interesting, the understanding patterns and the dynamics, the mother pattern, even the father pattern. I mean, for me, I didn't even realize that that was a pattern for me. I didn't even know that I was an anxious attachment until I started getting out in the dating world after my divorce, because I started behaving, doing things that I was like, who is this? What? And it forced me to really look at that and really understand, okay, yeah, so your parents divorcing at 7 years old, even though you don't associate that as a big capital T trauma, yeah, that was actually traumatic for your little 7-year-old brain.
100%.
And so for me, that's been such a huge thing that I've had to really work through, is moving from that anxious to a more secure place, and understanding those patterns for me. So I'm curious for you, when did you get to the end of yourself to where you were okay, because most men, and I don't mean to make blanket statements about men, but I think it is a fair statement. I don't know if you agree.
It's good to say a gross generalization. Yes.
Yeah. Is that a lot of men don't tap into this kind of healing work.
Yeah.
They
and
just
let's talk about why. It's
Yeah.
a good gross generalization. I think, it's nice that you might say, oh, I don't want to, generalize, but I think you can with men in this particular culture. And the reason why is because they are not encouraged at all. It is not something that we men get, that we can explore our emotions.
Yeah.
There was a moment I also talk about in the book, I think it might be in another article there, where my mom, screamed to my dad one day, she's leaving, she left, and he's like, go get your football stuff or take you to practice. And in that moment, right, I was a little boy, I definitely got the message, I'm a child of the 80s, don't cry,
Yeah.
And so here I am in football practice, my very first football practice.
You do talk about this in the book.
And so that very first football practice, all I want to do is scream, cry, run away. And, of course, I'm at football practice. So, we fight or flight. I was able to fight. And I hit those, I'll never forget. I think that's where even my muscular build today reflects the strategy and coping mechanism I took. And it was a tough guy coping mechanism. So I think a lot of men, they do this and they'll strive in particular ways. Oh, I'll make a ton of money so I feel powerful and secure, safe and secure. Oh, I'll build a lot of muscle so I feel safe and secure. Oh, I'll control my woman so I feel safe and secure. Ultimately it's trying to feel safe and secure, right? So that's ultimately how that began to start for me. And so, and I'm losing the thread of where we were going.
No, I was just asking, when did you kind of get to the end of yourself where
okay,
you're
yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Because you didn't just wake up one day and you're like, oh, I got to explore my mother patterns.
Yeah,
Like, no,
no.
like this was a total, just like for me too. I mean, for me, it was like, it was forced upon me because my whole marriage imploded and I had to really, reevaluate a lot of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, for you, because you didn't ever actually get caught. I mean, this was a self-admission with the affair, as you talk about in your book, which is
And in the
also pretty uncommon.
And by the way, and I talk about this in the book too, it even gets worse. Like the women listening to this right now, it gets worse because when I admitted this to my wife, it wasn't because I was like all of a sudden got a conscience. This is the hardest part, right? This is just the part where you're just like, oh my God, this guy is such an ass. But what it was for me, it was like, I needed her.
Yeah.
Because the lover who I thought I was in love with completely rejected me, right? So now I'm like, this is where it gets just really messed up. So then I'm like, I am now confessing to my wife because I need her. It is so backwards, but you say, where did I figure it out? That's what it was. I was like, my repeated patterns, my stuck emotions, even though that was the first time I had ever cheated on a woman, it was always there. I was cheating in my own way, just not physically.
Right.
And being rejected by my lover at the time. Long, weird, story where I actually was the one she was married to. I was actually the one who found her with a third dude, right? So, in this roundabout way, I was in a betrayal sandwich. I was betraying my wife. I was being betrayed by the woman that I was betraying my wife with. And of course, I was betraying myself. And I think all of those things came together in a way where I'll never forget. I was in the car and I was doing this just crazy thing in my brain where I was driving around town looking for my lover with her other lover, right? Doing this weird stuff. And I'm sitting in a parking lot and I actually found them, right? So because, I'm seeing her car and his car next to each other. So this weird stuff that we do, this is the moment where it all hit me. So I'm like, doing this thing and I'm like out of my mind, schizophrenic.
Remember I was saying when we were on the last podcast, I was like, I felt like I was going batshit crazy.
100%.
Because I found myself doing stuff that I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of you listening to this, if you've ever been in this place, you wonder, like, you've done crazy stuff like this. So here I am.
Like checking phone records and
all the stuff, because what we're doing is we're trying to be, the manipulation of like not being able to have what we want, not knowing the truth is unbearable.
Oh my God.
And in that moment, I was like, I'm done. Like, I don't even know who you are. This is not the human I want to be. And that's when the turnaround began to happen. Now, of course, it gets way harder from there at first, because once you become super self-aware and you own things, you start to realize how messy it is. And that's when you really start going, I'm going to do the work. Now, here's the thing, Amber, that I think is also just bizarre about me and embarrassing about me. I had all the tools. Like, here's the interesting thing. I would always been interested in personal development. Since I picked up my first personal development book, probably at 18 years old. So it wasn't like all of a sudden, like Jill, actually, my wife didn't do any of that. She picked it up after this all happened with us. I did couples counseling. I was a couples counselor. Through medical school, I was doing it. So I was smug even when I met Jill, my wife, that I was like, I'm like the best partner in the world. I got all this figured out. Like, I'm good. And of course, it all blows up. But I was lucky because all that personal development work ahead of time, I think, was the thing that made me go, okay, wait a second. This is like, there's something, completely wrong with what's going on here. And so I took, that whole thing, extreme ownership, radical responsibility. I just basically said, I'm going to be the most honest person I know. I am going to use this to grow. I'm going to use it to help others. I'm going to turn this into something amazing for me. And I went on that journey. And it took about 6 years to get over it. It took another 4 years to make complete sense of it.
Well, one of the things, like, obviously in this book, and you and I can have conversations about this because we've been through, divorce, and and for a lot of, you didn't go through divorce yet before you started really looking at yourself. For me, it was like the event was a divorce where I started going inward. What about people, listeners who are, they are, they're not in it. They're happily married, right? Or they are, or maybe they're not happily married, but maybe they've been married for a long time. And what typically can happen is obviously partners start to grow apart. Like, how does somebody, to really start to navigate going down that like personal development path, but also still incorporating their partner into it, right? Because I think it can be easy. Like for me, I know it was a very kind of like isolating journey for myself, right? Because I was divorced and I was having to do this on my own. But I think that, sometimes what can happen, and I'm sure you see this all the time in your practice, is just, people can start going down that personal development path. And if the partner doesn't come along or they don't invite their partner to come along, then separation can happen.
Yeah.
And so what is that, or kind of what advice do you give about, around that?
Yeah, and actually the whole premise of the book is the fact that I think that the romantic partnership is one of the best ways to help. Like if you can get your partner on board, your personal development, both of your personal development is going to skyrocket.
Yeah.
But what happens is that most of us, because we're not schooled in this way of being, a lot of people will dig their feet in. And in that case, it is usually a breakup. One of the first things I'll say here before I go through some of the philosophy to understand is that all relationships end. And this is the other thing that we need to understand about romance. Every relationship ends regardless. End of story, no matter what. It's just common sense. We die. This isn't the fucking Notebook. We don't hold each other's hands and die and like we, go off into the sunset together, right? You are going to be alone at some point.
Yeah.
That's the first thing from my perspective, understand. And to do this work, you first have to go, every relationship ends.
Yeah.
And I will, in the end, have to be with myself. Now, the next thing to get your partnership involved is to understand the dynamics that we've never learned. In every relationship, there's really three components, right? There's you, there's me, and then there's this entity in the middle that I call you/me. I just give it a name and call it you, me. So there's you, me, and there's you, me. Now, what happens is when we get in romantic partnerships with people, we give up the you and the me for the you, me. And that is a huge mistake, because what we do is our whole identity goes into this you, me, and it keeps these two other individuals stuck. Instead, what we have to do is you has to be you, me has to be me, and we have to infuse and incorporate almost like a shared bank account into this third entity. We cannot become the third entity. When we do, our personal development is stifled. So that's the other thing to understand this dynamic. Now, to get your question is, how do we get our partners involved with this? Authenticity is the thing that we must anchor to. And personal development drives me nuts with the concept of authenticity, because, again, I also think they get it all wrong. It's not being authentic to a past Amber or a past Jade. It's not even being authentic to a current Amber and a current Jade. It's basically Amber looking at herself and Jade looking at himself and saying, I want to be authentic to my best next level human self. And I want to be in a partnership that sees me that way and works with me to help me achieve that. And I also want to do that for my partner. But most of us, again, never learn authenticity. In other words, what we do, that's why it's the you complete me model, right? You're supposed to be the best wife. You're supposed to take care of the kids, do the dishes, do all the things, whatever cultural sort of, the man's supposed to go off and make the money. All these stories wrapped up in that, instead of basically being like, I don't know, maybe I don't want kids. Maybe I don't even want marriage. Maybe I just want a partner. Maybe I want, marriage without kids. Maybe I want my husband to stay home and take care of the kids. Maybe what I want is my work to be my most important thing. But instead, we all have to fit ourselves into these boxes. So you have to understand what it is you really want. So to me, it's purpose and authentic purpose. Why am I here? And what do I want this relationship to help me achieve as my next level human self? And what can I help my partner achieve? And you'll be surprised when you start seeing your partner. Like, one of the things I do when I work with couples is I essentially say, when's the last time you actually saw your partner as the next level human partner that you thought you were marrying in the beginning. Because what we do is we think it's all about they were beautiful and they were hot and we were having all the best sex and all the things and all that went away. And I go, no, that's not what it was. There was a time when you saw them as an inspirational figure. You respected them, you admired them, you saw where they were going and you saw their potential, and you loved the idea of the story of you helping them achieve that and them helping you achieve that as well. You lost that around somewhere along the way. Why did you lose it? Because you lost yourself. You see what I mean? You lost yourself. You basically wrapped yourself up in that story, and that was the mistake. We need to re-anchor to our authentic selves. Then we have to get our partner to see that authentic self and understand and get them on board. So I have one rule when I'm working with people, and I'm like, if you want to know if it's over or not, all you have to do, it's actually pretty simple. All you have to do is step into your fully authentic self and also start seeing them as their fully authentic self. And then you watch and see, do they support you as your fully authentic self? And do they rise to you seeing them as their next level human self? I'll give you a simple example of this: the dishes, right? This is how to think about this. Here's how you do it. You go, this idea of like, by the way, the laundry and the dishes and all those things are never about the laundry and the dishes. They're about respect. They're about admiration. They're about like, are you a team member or whatever? But the typical orientation is you got a partner doesn't do the dishes. You say, Amber, how come you don't do the dishes? You never do the dishes. You're a pain in the ass with the dishes. And then that turns into, by the way, you never help. Like that's what we do. And that's what we think. Now that's not seeing you as your best self, your next level human self. So instead I go, and maybe you don't do the dishes, but if I even see you move one thing towards the dishwasher, or I see you sweep the floor instead, or you do one errand for us or whatever, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, thank you for being this amazing helper. That's the first move I'm going to make. And then I'm going to wait and see, what do I have? Do I have someone that goes, yeah, you're right, I do the dishes all the time and I don't know what your problem is, while they don't do the dishes? Right. Or you have someone to go, thanks, babe. I mean, I know that's important to you and I'm doing my best and thank you for seeing. Now that is someone you can work with, and vice versa, where when you're being your authentic self, they can actually step up and go, babe, I love you. And that thing you did out with our friends or whatever, where you get this thing where you get a little rude or you do this and that, like, it's just not you at your best. And I love you regardless, but like, I really think you need to work on that. Like, and I want to help you. Like, how can I make you feel more comfortable in those situations or whatever? And then you look and go, yeah, I always, I know that I can deal with being cold and I come across this way and I don't want to be that way. And here I've got somebody who's loving me in spite of my dysfunction. This is how you begin to do this. And actually, me and my ex-wife Jill last night had a long conversation about this, because she was talking about different relationships and her relationship and my different relationships that I've been in. And she's like, well, what do you do when you have someone that you meet, right, for the first time, and they're dysfunctional and they're a little crazy and they're a little how they are? I'm like, I love that. Here's the thing. I want that immediately, because I go, I'm ready to do that work with you. It's not just about having orgasms with you, right? It's about like, I want to do that work with you. I want to step into your dysfunction and I want to see if I can grow you to your better self. Like, that's the whole reason why I want to do relationships now. And I want that partner that I'm doing to be the same with me. And it's funny, we don't look at it like that, right? We're like, I don't want to deal with your dysfunction. Meanwhile, I'm like, bring it on. Like, I want to see it. I want to see all the messy parts of you.
No, I love that. And I think what came up for me when you were saying that was, I think for me, like, yes, I agree. Like, one of the most exciting things about being in a romantic relationship is being able to grow together and really bring out your best selves, your most authentic selves, and really kind of grow. But I think what comes up for me is, I think in the past, a pattern for mine, and you also said this was a pattern for you, is also being the saver. So sometimes I wonder, and I have to check myself, okay, am I attracted to this person's dysfunction because I want to grow with them, or it's because I think I can fix them?
Yes.
Like, that's tough. Like, that's tough to discern.
It's very tough to discern, but here's how you know.
Okay.
It's funny how life, like, I have this thing in metabolism that I talk about: hunger, energy, and cravings. It's a way that your metabolism talks to you. I call it HEC, or heck.
Yeah.
If your heck's in check, your metabolism's good, and if your heck's out of check, your metabolism is not good. Well, in personal development, it's the same thing. If you have repeated patterns, recurrent obstacles, and particularly stuck emotions that come up again and again, then you know that this is a fixing situation and you're doing your thing again.
Yeah.
That's how you know. Versus if you have synchronicities and serendipities and opportunities and a different sort of excitement and growth, and this is sort of a new sort of emotion that you're dealing with. That's how you know you're moving in the right direction. Actually, with personal development, it's actually pretty easy. Like when I'm working with clients, I simply just go, does this remind you of anything? That's one of the best questions. And, they're like, well, it reminds me of usually a childhood thing or an adolescent thing. Like, is this an emotion that you have a lot? Versus, is this something that is new? Because when I'm doing my savior thing, I also have a whole other group of emotions. Resentment, bitterness can come up. This, why am I doing all this work? Like those kind of things sneak in, and I know those things really well. Versus the other one, I'm just having fun and loving my girl, right? And I'm not at all feeling like there's any expectations or assumptions. Like when I'm the savior, there's an expectation and an assumption there. There can be some resentment and bitterness. I can feel drained by that. When I'm not being the savior and I'm just being the supportive, like I want you to get to your next level, there's no expectations and assumptions there. It's like, babe, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, right? But you can. I want to help you do it for you, but I'm not going to be pushing you or trying to control you. That's a different thing. Once the control stuff, and by the way, this is what's fun about being in romance, right? Because then you can say to your partner with their dysfunction of wanting to control and save, you can actually say too, and as a way to grow them, is be like, hey, babe, you don't need to save me, right? Like I know this is your thing, but you don't need to, we can work on this together. You don't need to save me. What's going on with you? Are you worried about finances? Like what's happening here? Like let's dialogue a little differently than versus you jumping in and wanting to control the situation. And once you understand this orientation, fights still are fights, right? They're still fights, but they resolve in a different way. They're instead of frustrations, they become more like initiations. It's like, oh wow, we got through another one of these benchmarks in our relationship versus, this sucks. And it's a whole cool way of coming back together and being like, that's an interesting thing we haven't grown through before. We haven't tackled that before. It really changes the dynamic. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you save the relationship, right? But what it does mean is when the relationship ends, you are far better off than you were before. Like how many people do we know, Amber? Like, I know you have friends that this is the case as well, where they go through relationships, they come out of those relationships and they are shells of their former selves. Now imagine not being that. Imagine coming out of a relationship and being sad that it's over and going to really miss your partner, but also just being like, oh my God, I am so much more equipped and so grateful I had that time with them, even though I missed them, but I'm so grateful I learned this and I learned that, and I can be so much better off. I think that's just a more beautiful place to come from.
Absolutely. I mean, I think too, it gives you a little bit of, even in like the sadness and all of that. I know for me, when I've ended relationships like that and walked away, it gives me some peace, just knowing like, okay, I feel like the lesson here I have learned the lessons here, and now it's okay for me to move forward. And so, hearing you talk, as I mentioned, even when we started this, it's like your level of like self-awareness and like kind of like your how you're viewing relationships and your part and their part and all of that. It does go back to, like you said, really first tapping into your authentic self and kind of what you call your next level human. And I know your book, that's one of the beautiful things about your book, is it really helps the readers like tap into that. What are maybe some of the ways, or you can share with the listeners somebody who's listening, there's like, okay, Jade, like that sounds awesome. Like, yeah, I want to tap into my authentic self, but I don't even know, like, what are we talking about here? What do I need to do? Like maybe what are some ways that you kind of share, maybe even like 30,000 foot, like that you start to tap into that and guide the reader through that in your book?
Well, so here's the assumption. There's a philosophical assumption that I make, and we can see if you agree with me and the listeners. I already know that you're probably going to agree with this, but we'll see what the listeners think. The assumption is that this cliche saying, and I don't love all cliche sayings, but I kind of like this one, that life is not happening to you, right? Life is kind of happening for you,
I
right?
say it all the time.
Right. So to me, let's make that assumption, and this is an assumption I make. Then if that's the case, that means that there is got to be like a way that life is communicating with you. It's to get you to your authentic self, right? So let's imagine for a minute, let's play the game that we are spiritual entities that are going through a video game. So we come down here to play the game of human, right? And this game is set up in a way that we get certain markers along the way that tell us if we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction. So to me, if you want to know what your authentic sort of self is, all you have to do is go back and look and say, what are the things that my pain has repeatedly come up, the repeated patterns, the recurrent obstacles, the stuck emotions. This is the first thing. Now, most of us avoid these things because they're not comfortable. But this is the first thing that I think is pointing you towards your authentic self. Pain is a path to purpose. Suffering is a source of meaning. Your hurt is a way to help. So to me, the first thing you look at is you go, let me go back and look at my entire life. What is the thread? What is the thread throughout my entire life? So for me, the thread throughout my entire life is I was a younger brother who was bullied, which made me have to kind of develop my voice, right? And I could see that thread. I had developed my voice. I was deeply with my mom. You guys heard that story. So I became very sensitive to women and understanding women and their emotions. And in my younger years, I used that to manipulate, but I really understood that. So this thread is happening. But what happens is, did it work, right? And how did it work? So those things are neutral, right? My ability to be an empath with women and, tap into their emotions and all that's useful. But when I have certain romantic relationships, if they end a particular way or the same complaint is there or I end up feeling like I did them wrong and guilty or whatever it is, that's a repeated pattern, a recurrent obstacle, stuck emotion, which is telling me, it's not saying that my strength is wrong. It's telling me I'm using it wrong. And that basically now I need to use it in a different way. So to me, this is what's learning. When you're becoming authentic, you have a learning phase that you go through, and it's important and it's difficult. Easy is earned, as they say, right? So it's this idea of paying attention to recurrent obstacles, stuck emotions, repeated patterns, and then being aware of those. Not listening when someone tells you this feedback that we're getting all the time. You're too anxious, or you're too needy, or you're an asshole, or you do this and that. You don't take it on as a shameful thing like I am this. You just take it back as feedback and you go, have I heard that before? Is that a repeated pattern, a recurrent obstacle, stuck emotion? And do I want, because it's okay if you go, yes, I agree, and I'm doing it anyway. But it's also okay if you go, yeah, I see that and I want to be better. So it really is about following the thread of the video game of human. The repeated patterns, the recurrent obstacles, the stuck emotions tell you you're heading in the wrong direction. Your emotions are the GPS of the soul. So they point where you are on your map. So, sort of like over here is shitty city and over here is next level human, metropolis. Where are you trying to get to? Well, your emotions and those repeated patterns, recurrent obstacles, stuck emotions will tell you. I oftentimes talk about the emotions of afraid, anger, frustration, resistance, anxiety, insecurity, and depression. It's an acronym. The reason those are important is because they tell you if you're stuck in any of those emotions. It also tells me, in my mind, that you're not living to your authentic best self. These are an indication that you're living from wrong stories. So the answer to your question for me is a really simple one. It's literally just, what is my emotional body stuck in? And does it feel good to be there? Or do I yearn to be something else? Like, I have this theory that I guarantee you and I talk, there's something that you go, and I think you're doing it, right? But there's something you go, I'm meant for something a little different. And yes, you're a great mom and you're a great wife and, would make a great partner and all these things, but there's something else that goes beyond what you can do for other people and those things. It's more like, what can I give to the world in a greater way? I think all humans have that. And the more your life is pointing you and pushing you towards that, the better. What most people are doing is they're avoiding their pain. They're avoiding the repeated patterns, the recurrent obstacles. They're not looking at it. They're not taking the feedback that people and life are giving them. And therefore, they're not being their authentic self. Let me just put it this way, just to be very simple. I cheated on my wife, was a liar, cheater. That is the worst. Like, I'm so embarrassed to share that. Of course, that's not anything that anyone would be flattered to say or have anyone think about them or whatever. However, I also know that that's very real, that I'm human. I own it, authenticity. I learn from it. I began to teach from it. And when I incorporate that and all those lessons, that's me stepping into my authentic self with all my dysfunctions and all my messiness. In that, owning the dysfunction, I dissolve the dysfunction. I integrate the dysfunction. Now, of course, now I get to go on to the next dysfunction, right? Like ultimately, there's always something else to learn.
100%.
But at least this one I'm past, because the video game is like it's levels. It's like, oh, okay, Jade, you got past honesty. Here's an interesting thing, right? Like I guarantee you, right? You probably never had an issue with honesty, right? Like honesty, maybe it was never your thing. Like a lot of you listening just go, I don't get the honesty thing. I was always honest, or I was always integrous.
I mean, I don't know. I was going to the clubs when I was 13 and telling my mom that I was sleeping at my best friend's house.
Okay,
So
maybe honesty was a challenge for you. But for some people, they're like, no, I've always been honest. Kindness has never been an issue for me. I've always been immensely kind.
Yeah.
Right. Then I had to learn honesty is kinder than kindness. But kindness was like, everyone's like, Jade's the nicest guy in the world. Like everyone was just shocked, with what happened but all of us have these things.
Yeah.
Mine was honesty. Mine was a challenge with honesty. And then I had to own that. And now it's not honesty anymore.
Yeah.
Right now it's, for me, probably it's boundaries around overgiving and being taken advantage of that way and being drained. Like that's now kind of has been my challenge in my 40s and 50s. And so that's how you do this. So you basically just look and say, my authentic owning and telling of my story of struggle is how I become authentic and aligned with my purpose.
Yeah, I love that so much. I mean, and it's like I always talk about, if something, when you talk about like just really the simplest way is just really paying attention. Yeah. Like what are some of these feelings that you're feeling? Are they some things that, come up a lot? Is this consistent feedback that people continue to tell you? And if so, like pay attention, right? Or like if something, I always say, if something triggers you, right? Well, like that's your dead giveaway that's something
100%.
that you like, if you find yourself getting upset about something, then that is a dead giveaway to pause and look a little bit deeper. So
yeah, as a matter of fact, I'll say something about that. Like I oftentimes think the shortcut to purpose is think about what really pisses you off and think about what really lights you up. And your purpose is somewhere in that
1,000%. Like it's so funny. Like that is actually when I have my like initial calls with women who are working with me, that's we're trying to get to like, what is your purpose? That's the first question I ask is like, what really pisses you off? And that was a question that I asked myself when I was kind of going through this self-discovery. And for me, and this is probably not going to be a surprise to you, just obviously now given my platform, but it is women losing their voice and women losing their power. That for me, and I feel even when I talk about it, it's energetic shift for me. Like that pisses me off. Yeah. So
and watching you, by the way, do your work, you are immensely inspirational and powerful, right? So that's how you know, right? When it's like, and then you'll start getting that feedback. That's not the first time you've heard that, right? Like, so you've had the repeated patterns, recurrent obstacles, stuck emotions. You've gotten that feedback. Now you're getting this other feedback. There's no way you've heard over and over again lately from women, men, different people being like, you are so inspirational. That's the synchronicities, the signs, the opportunities. That's when you know you're beginning in alignment. So you move towards that. Oh, and you own it. And that's the other thing that I think, gross generalization, but I've found, more times than not, men will own things they got no business owning, and more times than not, women won't own what they have every right to own, right? Like men can be a little bit overly egotistical. Like it's both of them are both of them are insecurity needs, but women will, in a gross generalization way, will lean more towards insecurity, and men will lean more towards ego-based stuff, like more towards arrogance. Yeah. In general, it's not always the case, but in general. And both of us need to realize that, this is what you would do with your partner, right? It's just like, hey, look, you're fucking amazing. You are the best thing ever. And guess what? You're not that special. Right. Right? It's both. Right. It's both for yourself and them. And by the way, and I love being with you and the not so special parts, because those are the parts that make the magic. Yeah. Right. It's like, I don't know, like we don't emphasize enough. Like we'll get involved with like the physical stuff, like the great sex and all the orgasms and rainbows and all this stuff. But to me, I go, yes, 100%. It's not romance if you don't really have that, or it's not the best romance. Right. But the other part is to be able to get to the depth of somebody's dysfunction. Yeah. Like that's true depth. Everyone can be nice and give you what you need, but if you like, true partnership is like, let's go there. Like, let's go there together and practice, because the shit will hit the fan. We humans, we go through betrayal, we lose loved ones, we go through illness. We're gonna, that the whole point of a partner is to go, I don't have to do this alone. When I lose, my father, I don't have to do it alone, or I don't have to do it alone when one of us gets sick, or I don't have to do it alone if I go through, this financial stuff. The truth is, you are going through it alone, but at least you can have someone there that is like cheering you on from the sidelines. That's what we really want. Although I do think, at its worst, it's literally just, I'm afraid to be without somebody. Like, that's not, to me, what the basis of a great relationship. We all know that there's a ton of relationships out there. There's relationships of safety and convenience. And by the way, no judgment. I mean, there's many different reasons to be in a partnership. But I'm assuming that if someone's reading this book, The Next Level Human Work, or following mine and your work, that these are people like us that are wanting to be their best selves and wanting to make a difference and contribute as their best selves. And I think if that is you, then this orientation towards romance is something you've actually never been taught. I wasn't taught it, but it's to me the right orientation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, I would love for you to share just really simply, like, who is this book for? Like, who should read this book?
Yeah. This is for someone who's been frustrated at relationships in general and feels that every time they get in a relationship, they feel drained by it or less of their powerful self. This is for anyone who is also not in a relationship, who wants to understand how to grow themselves to be the person that they would want to date and attract. So it goes through this whole idea. It's really a philosophy book wrapped in romance. It's the entire Next Level Human philosophy. So basically, is someone is like, who do you want to become, and become the person you want to date, and become the person you want to be a lover with, and become the person you want to be in a long-term relationship with. And also understand that romantic connection does not make or break you, but it can grow you. And in my view, is probably the coolest and best, most amazing thing one of the most amazing things you can have in life if you got a true growth partner.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things, because I read the book cover to cover, and I actually listened to it audio. Like I said, you've been in my head a lot, but one of the coolest things about this book is you're such a great teacher. You do such a beautiful job of really making some of these like big ideas just very relatable. I love, like, I don't know how many, I'm like, how do you come up with all these acronyms? Like, there's so many acronyms in there. You have an acronym, like, you even didn't know. But anyways, I just want to share with the listeners that I did read this book. And even if you are somebody who, is in a committed relationship, but you're really just looking to grow together, and just, I think, we're always, the whole point, I think, of life is always to continue to grow and to evolve. And this is a beautiful resource to do that with. So thank you so much for writing it. Thank you so much for just being with me here today and sharing your wisdom. I appreciate it.
You're amazing. Thank you for your work as well. And thank you to all the listeners.
Yep, absolutely.